Calling the meeting to order at 4:06. We have Roy Gott, co-chair, Sandy Fortin, Mike Summerer, and Genevieve Bristol from the Island Institute so far. So we're going to skip minutes. Update of action steps from the prior meeting. So our prior meeting was the outreach event on April 26th. There really weren't any action steps specifically from that, but I thought it went very, very well. The group that was there was very receptive and appreciative of the presentation. And I can't say I heard anything negative about it. And I think the meeting or the will of the group that was present was pretty clear about a preference to go with a community or municipally owned option.
Yeah.
Sandy, of course, you weren't there, but I did ask both ways. I asked who preferred a municipally owned model, and I asked who preferred to let the ISPs do it, and nobody raised their hand for ISPs, which I think is pretty telling.
Yeah.
There was some interest in follow-up for the additional there were the further outreach meetings. People were interested in attending if there was new information, but we can also trickle out new information so people don't have to sit through the whole thing over again. Any thoughts that you took away besides that, Mike?
No, I thought the turnout was quite good. Did we do a head count?
I didn't do a head count.
I would guess around 50 to 60 people were there.
So we had 25 or 27 RSVP at the time that I ordered the food, the sandwiches. And we had approximately, not counting committee members. Well, let me just share.
That up right now.
I'm just going to share it.
Oh, okay. The ones that signed up, the list that you have for attendees, is that everybody that was in the room, or do you think
That's
some
everybody?
people did
That's
not?
everybody who's signed up, and I don't
Okay.
have a good way to tell how many we didn't
I gotcha.
have sign up. So those are just the people that signed up.
Okay.
And
Cool.
exclusive of committee members, and there were 4 of us there. So still a respectable group. I would say at least 10 or so, 10 or 15 beyond this list.
I would agree.
Because I think I set out 40 chairs initially, and then we added probably about another 10.
Yeah.
So again, I think that's a pretty good turnout. And even though not everybody did sign in, we got a good contact list of people who are obviously, if they want more information, they definitely would have signed up. So that's positive. And I've submitted for reimbursement for the expenses that we talked about before, including the expenses for the refreshments here. And as soon as that comes in, Mike, I'm going to get you a check over for.
I forgot all about that.
The very expensive pizza that I'm sure you're very worried about. But I don't like to have things sitting out there. So that's, yeah. These were the RSVPs over here. And I was actually, I don't know that I should be surprised. It was very backloaded. You can definitely tell when the Winter Harbor mailings went out. Most of these last few were the Winter Harbor people. So.
Yeah, and that continues to be an issue with Winter Harbor. Well, no, you mailed it post office, right? You didn't go through the town. Is that correct?
We went post off. Well, we went through the town to get it mailed out because to use the town's bulk mailing permit. And that's in both cases, Gouldsboro and Winter Harbor. But there was, I don't know why there was a delay on the Winter Harbor side. It went out about a week before the event. So.
Well, so that's something we should kind of stay in tune to if we're using the newsletter as well. We just got our Winter Harbor newsletter, I think yesterday. So the May newsletter is already a week or so late, like there are events that have happened and we've
Yeah.
missed it. So we've got some poor communication going on, unfortunately, in the Winter Harbor end. So if now that we have emails, this might be easier if folks are open to receiving notification by email or phone.
I think if they volunteered their email, it's a good indication that they want further
Sure.
information. So that's the assumption I'm operating under.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think changes. I still have the packages of chips that should be fine for the next one. I got the 42 assorted mini bags of chips. There's plenty of that left. The
Oh.
cookies were popular. The sandwiches were popular. Pizza was popular. The soda was not popular. The bottled water was popular. So I think next time we'll just go bottled water, sandwiches, pizza, and cookies, and use the remaining chips. Of course, I have plenty of plates and napkins left, so it'll be a little easier for the next one.
Nice.
And I will plan again for when we do it based on the RSVP. If we, if I order the food about 3 or 4 days in advance, I'm just gonna add 50% to the RSVPs for the amount of sandwiches and so forth that I purchase.
Right.
Which is how I got to where we were this time. That seemed to work out really well. Any other thoughts, Mike?
No,
On-
I thought it was a good start.
Was it recorded at all or any pictures taken from the event?
No, we didn't have any recording at that one, and I certainly was focused on talking. I was not a picture taker. That's not to say somebody didn't take pictures, but if they did, I don't know who it was and how to get those. But that can be something that we consider at the next one, because I think we'll have better access to technology at the next one. Coming out of that meeting, Bob did have some concerns. He not real concerns, but just, as he says here, if we go Dan Sullivan's solution, he has 2 questions, which there are actually 3 there, but are there any service level agreements involved? To which I know we talked about that with Pioneer Broadband when we had them join us before, and they said they did not do any service level agreements. To me, looking through the RFPs that Simon Thorne provided, there were definitely service level agreements mentioned in a couple of the RFPs. And to me, that suggests that would be something that we would negotiate with the provider.
Refresh my memory. What's the definition of a service level agreement?
I don't have it handy. I don't know if that's something Genevieve has. Do you have? Then that's fine. But I think it's generally an agreement that specifies for example, Consolidated used to say they guarantee 70% of the advertised speed, something to that nature. And we have Kendra Joe joining.
I know the answer to that.
Yeah, she probably does.
Maybe. What's the question?
Service level agreements.
What's the definition of a service level agreement?
In the context of our grant application or
any sort of contract or proposal between a provider and the solicitor of the proposals.
yeah, so within our contracts, we have service level agreements to an extent based on the technology and the baseline of broadband speed we expect to see. With the scalability of the technology. So technology being, fiber or cable technology that can provide broadband level speeds, the potential scalability of 10 up to 10 gigabit symmetrical, with the keeping in mind that there's technology in central offices that might have to be upgraded along the way, and technology that might be developed between now and 5 years from now, when that could meet or exceed those standards. On the cost side, I don't think that at this time, and I could be wrong, so I can get clarification on this under the first Connect the Ready contract, that we have tier cost requirements. We do have and apologies for being off screen. My internet has not been that great today. We do have requirements with our providers around ACP. So the need for a service package that is priced out at $30, so that if they were to subscribe for ACP, it would bring it down to $0. And we have seen some providers implement that, or beginning to implement that statewide with all customers, not just ACP, or not just in state funded locations. So like, for instance, Consolidated, I know, has done this, where because they have to implement it in areas like Skowhegan and Greater East Grand, because they receive state funding, they are creating the package as a statewide option for any ACP eligible customer. So for our funding, there are service level agreements. I can't think of any communities that haven't received state or federal funding that have implemented service level agreements. I do know that Bangor, for instance, has been in conversations with their incumbent provider to potentially invest in a rate lock, a 10-year rate lock that would do exactly what that says. Would lock in the rates for 10 years, and the city would be putting in funding to ensure that is the case. And so it's kind of like, if we were to supplement your build or give you funding, what could we get for it beyond just you extending to areas within the community that haven't been served, and upgrading to fiber. They have not come to the state for any funding. That is something that's being worked out directly between the city and the provider. I haven't heard of any other community going down that path. So hopefully that answers some of your question.
Thank you. And we can dig into that more again as we get a little further down this path here.
Yeah, and I do see your email of like specifically like DBU having service level agreements, that I'm less clear of for Pioneer's operating model on DBU, what they have in place around tier rates, available costs per tier rate, and the ability to increase, and they don't have another provider on that network to be justifying.
When we spoke with Pioneer, they said there were no service level agreements in place.
Okay.
So that was one of them. His other questions were, what is the mean time to repair? That is something that I have asked for that information, maybe not in that language specifically, but we had spoken with Dan Sullivan about any outages that they had and their time to restoration previously. And so when he gets back to me with that, I'll send that information on to the committee along with the answers to the other questions that occurred to me to ask. And if there are not enough subscribers, what happens to the bond taken out? Are the municipalities on the hook for the money? I think that one's pretty straightforward. if the communities back the bond and you don't have a big enough take rate, then the communities are on the hook for the difference, basically. And hopefully, if that were to happen over time, it would be a self-correcting problem, unless you really mess up.
Well, and I would add that that's where really strong community engagement and strong committees come into place. Like especially in areas where there's cable dense, right? You have to work through. We often underestimate the power of the individual resident, and also the barriers to switching even from DSL to fiber. Like I often pick on cable to fiber, but I've seen fiber build outs where like there's DSL customers who are just staying with DSL because it's like, oh, but I have to call and then I have to be here to set up a time. And I don't really understand what I have to do. Do I have to get a new TV to make fiber work? Do I, if I wanted to watch something, and what about my like those little barriers that may seem really small can like add up to enough of procrastination for someone to not switch over because they're like, it's okay enough, or like I make it work. And that's where community engagement really pays off, of like, let us like understand the barriers for you switching over, because maybe there's a cost savings, the service is above and beyond better between fiber and DSL. And just taking the time to talk a little bit more about it. And I know communities do this, all the time in the beginning of the process, but doing it when like trucks are rolling or about to roll is really impactful, because no one really takes any of this work. I hate to say this, but no one really takes it seriously until they see a truck rolling. It's like, this is always it could happen, it might happen, it's going to happen. But even once you get funding, like there's a time frame between funding and that first connection. And the time frame differs between which provider you're working with, an incumbent provider, an incumbent pole owner provider, a non-incumbent provider, a publicly owned network, right? So the timeline kind of differs when you factor in contracts and polls and make ready, between that funding celebration of yes, we got something, or this is actually happening, and that first connection. And the leeway time between is a really great opportunity to keep communicating, and keep everyone engaged. And then like when trucks are going to start rolling in communities is the time to have some of those more like, all right, let's really talk about what's going on in your home, or like what you have to do to make this connection happen. Do you need to get 2-inch conduit? What's your connection to your house going to look like? So there's all those conversations that really are primed for that time right beforehand, when it's like, it's real now, this is happening. And how do we make sure that everyone in our community is as informed as they can be to make the choice if they want to switch over, and in turn increase that take rate. And when you're on a publicly owned model, it's really important to increase that take rate, right?
Well, and I think that would be one of the things as we go through this process, as we get closer to implementation, that it would make sense to, I would even think, offer sort of one-on-one. Now, obviously, everybody who's involved in this committee has other demands on their time and their availability may be limited, but to go over some of those points that you raised that might be really nothing barriers to people switching, but just to help them understand, what it means to switch and what the advantages are and what are, if any, disadvantages to it. So that would be something I think we could probably get some volunteer work going, to be able to have sort of one-on-one calls for people to make that happen, if they're even the slightest bit curious about switching.
Yeah, and as you say that, Roy, it makes me think, I've kind of gone through this process with the food security, right? And helping get the new food pantry volunteers trained with food related things. It was really great because UMaine stepped in and had some programs. So are there programs or videos that we can use with our community members to sort of get them trained and ready for when we're ready to have them go out and sit with other community members, how can we make it really easy for them to have that conversation? Because I know me personally, I am not tech savvy, so I haven't got a clue how to go in and help somebody get set up. I would love to, but I don't even know where to begin. So if there's tools or resources like that that we can start getting people used to, that would be great.
And I know the National Digital Equity Center has a couple of resources. One of the ones that I suggest a lot to people are the Cutting the Cord class, and that just kind of teaches individuals how they can start to break away from, old cable services and then utilize the new fiber and, smart TVs and that sort of thing. And yeah, I'm not super tech savvy either. So having that sort of resource is really helpful to just kind of like share out to people and say like, hey, there are things out there you can use, and you'll learn something really great and support a really great organization along the way. So I'll share that out.
And I think the more the regional broadband partners like Island Institute engage their digital equity, build and engage their digital equity partners across the county, people are going to start hearing about this from different angles and not just the broadband committee, which I think is also going to be really helpful, hopefully. And our digital equity task force, and it's not just the ones that it might come to mind firsthand of like libraries and schools, but it's a lot of health services, affordable housing partners, and food pantry partners, and others throughout the space that are kind of broadband adjacent. So I think the more people hear about it from different angles, and there is no greater driver of take rate than just folks talking to their neighbors.
Right.
And I often think about something that one local provider said of like, we can do prescription subscriptions and we can do all the community meetings we want, but it's not until they see a truck hanging fiber that people are stopping the truck, and we'll see any given sign up guy out there with a tablet, I'm here, let's sign up now, because you're seeing it, you're thinking about it, you're available. And oftentimes, depending on the provider, that can be a place where committee members are also really, and volunteers are also really helpful and useful, sharing local stories of what this switch looked like and just kind of demystifying these switches, right? Because I have a love-hate relationship for this story, but in Southport, we had 9 conversations leading up to their broadband vote, and every time, even though it wasn't really about the technology and user experience, it delved into that, and there was often a gentleman on who just kept harping on this point of you mean I have to teach my wife how to use streaming services? She wants to watch X shows on these days at these times, and she has the cable box down, but now I have to figure out how to teach her how to do this without a cable box. Mm-hmm. And I always wanted to say your wife is going to probably figure it out faster than you are, because if she has a show she wants to watch, she's gonna figure it out. But there was a huge learning curve to a cable box and the remote with 50 buttons on it and the 200 channels in the middle that you can't watch. And people forget that because they've figured out their system and it's become just a part of their daily life to use it. But there was a huge learning curve to cable. There's probably less of a learning curve, I think, to fiber and streaming and all of the things that you can do on it. But there is a learning curve, and it's the work of kind of everyone around each other to help demystify what that is and help kind of ground truth what it means, because it can seem like this big mystical unknown of what do you talk about when you're talking about streaming in a cloud, but you can do all the same things. You can DVR on on YouTube TV, and we have lots of communities who've said if you want to watch Patriots and you want to get local news, these are the 2 streaming services that you need. You want to watch your cable television type channels, but you also want local stuff. This is it. And I appreciate, we didn't know that when the first couple of communities started rolling out fiber, But there's been enough survey work of those customers to be like, okay, we keep getting this question of like, how do you watch local news, and how do you make sure that you're watching the Patriots or catching the Bruins? Sorry, not my sports teams, but I'll never get to watch Pittsburgh sports up here. But yeah, so just those questions, and fortunately, we have a lot of like now very direct answers to that.
And I think those are real ways that we can actually implement in the community as well. For us, it may not be Patriots or Bruins, but it might be their own, their school championship that they can't go to, and being able to watch the school championship.
Yeah,
That's come up a lot the past year, that I've seen a lot of community members that couldn't actually attend, but we're trying to find ways to watch live.
yeah,
Um,
that makes a lot
You
of
can
sense.
share those with me, I guess. I'm happy to kind of take
Sure.
that, reaching out with that information to community members as best as possible. I'm not sure what that means. But I am familiar with and is it MDEC? I always
Mhm.
forget that acronym. So RSU 24 Adult Ed does have that, and we have been pushing that right from the very beginning of setting up the committee. And I don't believe they've gotten a lot of response as of yet, but we can work more on getting that out again. So, cool.
So a little bit tied into the last meeting and the outreach, and a little bit for communication. But I did go ahead and register SchoticBroadband.org. There's just a really basic website up there. It doesn't give us a lot of stuff, but it's enough to be able to post an agenda, post some archive minutes, and post some links and content. And we can upload files and so forth. So that's something that we can do. And I mention that because I also signed up for a free MailChimp account just under that. And I think what I'll do, Sandy, is I'll share the login credentials for that with you, because you are definitely, you are a much more dedicated communicator than I am. And not that, again, not that I can't push a button here or there, but it's there are limits to what I can do too, as far as my time. And so, but that response that I shared, where Bob responded to something, that was in response to the first email that I pushed out to those addresses that were submitted at the outreach event, and committee members.
Yeah.
Just committee members are in there, so you see what goes out to the other people who sign up. So,
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
and I think, even as, like you mentioned, all of the options, for being able to cut the cord successfully, those are stories that don't have to wait until we know what this project ultimately is. Those are things that we can be sharing anyway, and emphasizing that successfully doing that depends on having good internet. So linking the two, one is not necessarily, tied to the other, but they are related. So that's just another take that we can use on that. Goldsboro report, I don't have anything specific other than if, when we do have a report crafted, if Brianna wants to try and shoehorn it into the town report, we'll send it to her as well, just to have sent her a thing for the town report. I think we can still get it in for Winter Harbor fine, because I know Kathy's got me working on the cover, so as she always does. Information gathering, I think, as I mentioned to people, that it'd be great to start looking at the RFPs that Simon Thorne sent us to see what other towns have done. There definitely appears to be a Mission Broadband template at use in the greater Portland area of communities, whatever that group was called, and also Fort Fairfield appeared to use the same template.
And Mission Broadband is now finally contracted with us for this program. And I realized that my calendar has 2 Schoodic Peninsula meeting dates on times on it, and so I think I gave them the one previous 1:30 time. And so I am going to put them in connection with you all. And they can lean in on writing that RFP if that's of help and use to you. If you can remind me when your next meeting is, although I think it might be a community meeting, is that right?
Very likely our next one's going to be a community meeting.
Okay.
Actually, I had the old next meeting on the agenda, which is obviously not correct because we're not going back in time to do it. But
But if you'd like to meet with them before that, I mean, feel
Sure.
like they are of service to you to be used to support you in any way that makes sense.
I think it may be worth having another meeting in 2 weeks, and we'll discuss the timing of the outreach meeting here as well. You were not here when I'm pretty sure you weren't here when I mentioned at our outreach meeting on the 26th, Kendra Jo, the overwhelming opinion of the community members in attendance was to go with the municipally owned route, as opposed to engaging with incumbent ISPs to expand and have them operate directly. It was very clear nobody wanted to go the ISP route. Everybody preferred a municipally operated who expressed an opinion. So
And can
go
I
for it.
can I ask, with the understanding or intent of putting up community funds to support, or if it can be on the subscribers, then yes, but if it's on taxpayers, no?
It was basically the DBU model that was presented, in
Okay.
contrast to the responses that we got from Consolidated and Axiom. And so with that in mind, to me, those are 2 very different models. And
Mhm.
I know the Fort Fairfield and the other collaborative one RFP that I saw that used the same Mission Broadband template. It was sort of model agnostic, I will say. It said whatever the best solution is, and we're open to alternatives. So it occurs to me that it'd be possible to use that sort of model to do both things. Now, as much as I feel like if we have a similar sentiment from other community members throughout these other outreach meetings to go the municipally owned route, then obviously that's what we should focus on. But I feel like we would be doing a disservice if we didn't get some information for comparison to go, what it would look like to go the other route. So would it make sense, do you think, to do that all as one giant RFP to solicit for a spectrum of solutions like would be provided by the likes of Consolidated, Axiom, and then also something that would work? I assume it would be a combination of providers that would do the network and then do the internet service and so forth in a Down East broadband sort of model.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I mean, I've seen people kind of separate out contractor, builder, operator. I know in the DBU model, Pioneer serves as both. And I don't know what your conversations have been with DBU of, if you were to go down that path, hypothetically, if you were to go down that path, trying to get 2 providers, if you were interested in an open access model, trying to get 2 providers contracted to operate from the beginning. I don't know what that dynamic looks like. I don't know other town has done that. That's why Pioneer's the only operator on the model. But it's a conversation I encourage communities to have. If if one of the points that communities are excited about is the idea of a competitive open access network, then I would encourage that conversation early. I do think that, well, I think it will be interesting what you receive back. Regardless of what you put out, you could put out an RFP that says we only want to see responses that are community owned, full fiber to the premise, universal service throughout, and you're going to get responses based on what providers do. I haven't seen that many providers, at least at this point, tailoring to what a community wants. They are submitting what they feel is the best operating pathway for them, within some bounds of what a community is looking for. But you will probably get, if you get a response from a couple of providers, it might be the opposite of what you asked for, but it's what they're offering.
I know in talking with Dan Sullivan, they are finishing up negotiations with the second provider now. So not that has any bearing on what happens with us, just that it is now going to be the case that they're going to have two. We know about Pioneer. I'm not sure who the other provider is. They were negotiating with another one as well, but I think that certainly it's a good selling point to have that competitive open access element to it. And but even if it starts out with just one, as long as that one provider can offer comparable or better pricing, to me, that's, especially if the idea is that in the long term it can be a benefit to the community, that it can be potentially a driver of even a small amount of municipal income, instead of just channeling subscriber fees and your plans, all the money out of your communities. So yes, so we can rely on Mission Broadband through you folks.
Yeah, and I think you've been in touch with them in the past, but I will make it direct. I'll send an email. I just talked with JD yesterday about this and knew I was trying to make it to this tonight. So yeah, I can send that, and then I would encourage a follow-up conversation and then lean in on them as much as you can or want. Same with Dan Demerit. I believe you've spoken with him at least once. And yeah, again, like, they are there for your use. So please use them as much or as little as you feel like you need.
And you think one RFP in the vein of what has been done before by Mission Broadband could sufficiently cover both directions?
I think so. I think breaking everything out gets complicated. It also might deter some from responding because it takes more time. They are pretty, for smaller ISPs, they pretty much know who they contract with, like, and who they would be encouraging to respond. Like Axiom works with Hawkeye. Lots of people do, but like there isn't as much depth in that space. While there are some new entrants on the contracting side, even on the ISP side, and you might get a couple of new entrants or providers who are looking to come into Maine for responses. We've seen it in Southern Maine. We did see it with Greater East Grand. They got a response from SearTech out of Massachusetts, I believe is what they're called. So we've seen that pop up a little bit as we have more federal funding. So it's just interesting to kind of follow the responses of these RFPs. But I do think one is gonna get the job done the same way multiple would, with less complication.
The other piece, and reading through those RFPs, I noted there's often referenced a list of town properties available. And I know that's something that back when Ann Lane was on the committee, she had mentioned that the town of Gouldsboro had a bunch of property that would be available for use for CO locations or things of that nature. So that would be something I think would be good to start getting the information from the town offices. If there is property available that could be used in such a project, that'll probably become important as we move toward network design and so forth. Anybody have anything else they wanted to touch on information gathering and RFP? Actually, I'm going to ask this right now for Kendra Jo. The committee has toyed with the idea, and I would say toys really diminishes the interest level or the apparent interest level of, if we do go a community or a municipally owned route, working with other area communities that are also interested in going such a route. Because obviously, if we purely follow the DBU model, then they have one network operator that covers all of the towns that were original and have joined since then. And obviously, the more you can spread out that cost of operating that of having that network operator, the better your operating cost is. At what point, if we want to pursue that, do you think we need to start having those conversations in a more formal capacity? And what do you think might be the best way to solidify that going forward, I guess?
That's a
big
good question.
It's a big hypothetical question.
It is a big hypothetical, and I think I have a couple of answers. I think maybe the barrier for what I'm about to say is DBU, because I've seen this happen more with standalone utilities, right? So the formality comes into place when communities start to enter into an interlocal agreement together to form a utility. You could probably do the same thing, but under DBU's model, each community owns their own network. And the agreement is with DBU to operate that net, or to manage, right, that network and have various network operators. So, or have a network operator. So I still think that's, if you wanted to formalize, you could look at an interlocal agreement or an MOU to put on paper to clearly define your goals, and that you're working together and you're working together towards this solution. I will say that time is of the essence, right? Connect the Ready app, if part of your solution is seeking state funding, which I will say, like, that doesn't necessarily need to be the marker of success. And as we have less funding than we know we need, like, it can't be the marker for success for everyone. This next round of Connect the Ready funds is the most flexible if you're looking at full-scale projects that include underserved locations. BEAD funding, we would have to see a financial model that either has a take rate or an upfront capital that would cover those areas, because under BEAD funding, an underserved cable location is not an eligible location. You would only be coming to us for DSL. And I haven't had this conversation with Danny. We are formalizing a utility district roundtable that kicks off this week, but DBU is really the only established functioning utility district with customers. And I'm curious how he's looking at some of this funding and how DBU could compete with Pioneer under that funding resource, given their model. So yeah, all that to be said, like, if you're interested, if you feel like there are communities around you who are wanting to go down this path with sincerity, then there are, binding somewhat binding documents that you could put in place to kind of formalize and move forward on. I just, yeah, I think the sooner the better, if you're trying to go for state funding. If you're not, then that opens up a longer kind of pathway, right?
I would really like to get some funding in here.
Yeah.
What is the hard and fast deadline for this current round?
So program guidance should be out next month for Connect the Ready. I am a little unclear about where our board comes into the launch of that guidance, if they need to approve, and I can't quite remember what we did for the first round, but I can work to get that answer. But currently it's timeline to come out next month, June. Application window for Connect the Ready is set to open in August. And then the BEAD funding timeline is farther out. And again, it's the only eligible locations are those unserved, least served locations.
You mentioned DSL. Are you saying that it's only eligible for places that only have DSL? Is that the idea? Or it's not to put in DSL?
No.
Okay,
It's not to put in DSL. It's
good.
I mean, if we're gonna attribute speed to technology, it's that our top priority for BEAD is we have to have a plan to reach everyone who doesn't have a connection and is deemed unserved.
Okay.
Anyone less than 25/3. Then we have to have a plan to reach them. The second phase in what the federal government calls underserved is the less than 100/20 group. So the idea is that cable is deemed served by the federal government for BEAD funding. And again, it's about prioritization of those that have nothing or next to nothing. So basically your DSL customers, but not that we're putting in DSL. We would only be putting in
I was gonna say, yeah.
fiber and other technologies that can reach and exceed that.
That being said, some bonded DSL does meet that, but yeah. So do you have a sense for what we would need to have in place to be able to hypothetically qualify for this current round, or that will come out next month?
Well, the finer points will come out next month, but you'll need a partnership. You would need your ISP and contractors secured. Well, I say that like if you were doing the DBU model, like there would be a partnership. The private-public partnership would be between, oh gosh, I actually don't know what that is. If it's between the community and DBU or the community and Pioneer. I think potentially all three. I'd have to check back of what happened with Charlotte when they came through the grant round. But you'd have to have that secure. There'd have to be an MOU. If you were going with another provider, there'd need to be an MOU and to show us that partnership. You'd have to have your capital secured. So if you were getting funding from your community, you would have to have that vote in place. If you were a line of credit, $150,000 line of credit, you'd have to have that in place. If you were going for bond funding, you'd have to have that. If you were going to the Maine Municipal Bond Bank, you'd have to have that secured, right? So those are consistent across all of our programs, that those won't change. The eligibility criteria, the amount of funding that we're asking of communities and providers, that might be subject to change for match, that might be subject to change. Some of those finer pieces and how much these things weight in the scoring, that all is subject to change until it's public.
So you mentioned having the financing lined up. Now that financing, that's with the assumption that there is grant funding to go with it, or that's just financing for the whole thing and then you get the grant money hopefully and that offsets.
So this is a bit of what we're working through. Places that have used networks that have used the full faith and credit of their towns haven't struggled to secure funding. And they've done the 100% path where it's like, we are doing this regardless. We'd like to see grant money offset some of the cost, but like, we're doing this. We've seen communities only go for the match request, like about roughly 25% of your overall cost to build. Where utilities in particular struggle is when they don't use the full faith and credit of their town, because then they look like a startup business. And I don't know that we've seen this play out under DBU, because I'm pretty sure all the communities under DBU have had some level of local support from their tax base, not in the millions necessarily, but some bit of support. And then DBU has an operating history. But for Midcoast Internet Development Corporation, Waldo Broadband Corporation, right, they are standalone utilities with the full support of their community, but not using their communities to back their bond. So they don't have a financial history. So we're getting in the weeds a little bit, but like, these are just things that you should know as you're trying to make some of these decisions of how your town plays into this. And we're working with FAME and Finance Authority of Maine, and the Maine Municipal Bond Bank to try to alleviate some of these barriers or potentially create a bond for utilities, and trying to get that up before in preparation for our next grant round. They are also joining us this Friday for this kickoff. So some of this is to be determined if that's possible. There seems to be interest from them in trying to find something that will work, especially in places where communities just don't have the financial capacity and a surety to back a bond that's sometimes bigger than their entire town budget. Right? Like when you're looking at a couple million, millions of dollars for a project, when your town budget is less than that, it can be quite scary for communities, even if your financial modeling shows that you wouldn't really need your town. You just need the full faith and credit of your town to get the money, but you'd have the take rate and the line of credit in the beginning to cover the cost. So it's just that dynamic, which can be a little difficult.
I have a couple questions.
Sandy.
So we're two communities working together, and we may have answered this in a past meeting. I believe maybe it was brought up that one community would have to be sort of the lead on that, as opposed to the two of them going in it together. Does that sound correct? Or how would that go?
To give you a clear answer, I would need to talk to our CFO who's been in contracts. Like, we are contracting. So let's flip this on the other way. Like, I know that in the first Connect the Ready round, we contracted with a provider. The provider came in with the support of two towns. Like, that was the application, was two towns. Both of those towns are in our contract as well. Like, they need to sign off as well. So this is, if you go the DBU model, I know we've worked through this with previous MCA funding to like Alexander and Cooper maybe. I think we've worked through what the contract looks like with DBU, because there's the town, there's DBU, there's Pioneer, and who and how and what who's responsible when things happen, if the take rate isn't met and all of those pieces. So let me get you a clear answer on that operating model. I think the other, if you decided to not do DBU, but do your own network, municipally owned network, I guess I would question like why you wouldn't come together as a formal utility to do so. And then that utility would be the entity that applies.
Right.
And then if you were to do private partnership, it would be that example. It would be the provider coming into the contract, them being the primary applicant, the communities being the co-applicants and support. And because there's community funding and partnership under Connect the Ready, specifically, communities also are in the contract.
Yeah,
Is that
and I-
helpful?
Yeah, and I guess I kind of see it as similar to what we do with the ambulance system or with the school. You know, it would be prorated out according to how many users there are from one community to another to come down to the bottom line. But what I see happening is the neighbor saying, well, how much is it gonna cost me in the end? And so if there's a better understanding of what that final dollar is to each community, and what that equation may look like, that might be a little bit more helpful for the sale of doing it as a DBU or for either situation.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think if anyone has done a cost comparison between a DBU model and a standalone utility. I'm sure there are some efficiencies in cost because they're already operated. My assumption is, but I don't know for sure because I can't think of anyone in that area no one in that area specifically has done a municipally owned instead of DBU. Besides Rook Bluffs, but DBU wasn't on the table for them at the time. So yeah.
And my one other question was about interest rate, talking about bond funding or credit. Any idea what the interest rate or rate of return is for those loans?
I do not. And I know one thing that we're working through is, if we were to do something with Fame, they're often whatever the interest rate is +2.
Okay.
Because they're not technically a financial institution like a bank. But they're often easier for higher risk to go through. But this would be a bond through the Maine municipal. Yeah, it would be partnership with Maine Municipal. So, I think if you were to use your towns to back your bond, you would go through Maine Municipal Bond Bank, you would see a much lower interest rate. If you were to stand up a utility, you would probably see a higher interest rate, given that you would not have a financial history, a 2-year financial history. Yeah, and I also, if you were to go that route, I think the ISP you choose factors in a little bit, then you start trying to figure out how you de-risk some of that. Which again are the elements we're still trying to work through with some other utilities.
On that point, is it, you mentioned the 25% match request, and would that be similar if we did the utility route versus the individual towns?
The match, I believe under Connect the Ready, any community owned network, regardless of model, DBU, your own, regional versus municipal, the match requirement per premise pass would be the same. The change might be between community and ISP owned. We might see a difference there. But again, it's not final yet, so.
Now, Sandy, you were talking about per capita, and I was thinking of the nature of the discussions that happen in these communities when it comes down to who pays for what. It might be worth considering different models, especially if we do form a utility. Something of a cost sharing model that balances users or residents, so per capita, with, for example, miles of roads served or something to that effect. Because there's the idea of how many people, but there's also the idea of what's the cost of actually building out that network. And I think people would probably feel better if there's an element of the cost to the network involved in that. And I think that would be something probably a lot easier to do in a utility model than if you've just got towns coming together. Because if you got towns coming together, then it's very easy to say, well, this is the cost for Winter Harbor. So Winter Harbor, that's on you. Goldsboro, here's your cost. This is what you pay. Does that make sense, Kendra?
I think I followed it. I will to play this out a little bit. So, under any publicly owned model, you could ask in your RFP for a breakdown, the full scoping project, yes, but a breakdown between communities of road miles, cost of equipment, per divided by premise passed or premise served, right? So then you would have an average cost per premise pass for Goldsboro and for Winter Harbor. So, and they'll probably be different, right? Because fluctuation in number of homes, but also fluctuation in road miles. So that would provide some clarity. I think if you were to go the private partner route of an ISP owned, they would just give you a flat, like, we expect, like, I think Consolidated to date or in the last round, you know, they brought in the $700 per premise requirement, and then they asked every town that they worked with that could to put in $150 per premise pass. So it was kind of even across the board. They felt that based on the scoring, that was the most additional funds beyond requirement that got you the extra points that were available. Does that make sense?
I think it certainly adds another layer.
Okay, lots of layers. This is a big broadband onion.
Yeah.
So there's lots of elements at play. Obviously, you know, I think the working with an ISP is going to be the cheapest thing. Like that, there's no doubt about that, right? So, and if communities are comparing those two things, like they're not apples and apples.
Right.
There's so many factors at play. I think for the community to be very clear about what your value set is, right? If you want universal broadband to everyone, you want it to be a certain technology, check. Okay, now is it that you're willing that in order to make this happen, you see the value in efficiency, and the faster the better. You see the value, you know, or you prioritize the value of, if we're putting in any money, we want to own it and operate it, and we recognize that means we have to put in more money, but we'll have a profit, you know, a revenue generating asset for our communities. And it's where they put the value. And honestly, like, can they recognize that? And sometimes this is hard. Like, yes, there might be a chance that taxpayers would pay in the first couple of years. It's like dollars per month. And I've seen some really good models of breaking this down to, like, Vinyl Haven had a really good model of like breaking it down to, based on your tax valuation of your property, this is how much this warrant ask of X million dollars plays into your overall tax increase if we had to use taxes to pay back any of the bond. Broke it down to the year, broke it down to the month. And I think at the highest it was like $12 per month. So there are those pieces, because what we have to recognize is this model for publicly owned models, you're seeing your debt payback over 15 years, 20 years, right? ISPs are trying to make their money back in 3 years, 5 at most, right? Much shorter term. So, but it's also why it's a larger upfront capital cost.
I think one of the things that, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but I'm pretty sure I stressed that it'd be pretty easy to go the ISP route. There would be very little required of us after the fact. You know, it's not anything that we have to maintain. It's all on the internet service provider, but then we lose control once it's built. And I think one of the big selling things was that we maintain control if we own the network.
And that was clearly the point that was picked up at our town information meeting, as the people did not want to cede control, future control of this network to the for-profit private entities.
So, like you said, there are certain things that the people in the community express they have value for, and that's why, and one of the reasons why I've leaned in this direction for a long time. So, yeah, and there's, like you said, there's a risk involved if we don't hit that take rate, obviously,
Yeah.
And that needs to be something that's clearly communicated when we're having the meetings, when we're making these decisions. Obviously, if there's going to be any bonding, that's going to come down to a vote, I believe.
Yep.
And so that's part of the timeline here, that if we need to go out to a vote on bonding for this, that would probably, well, I don't see any way that it can happen before August without a special referendum. Because it's not going to happen in June.
Well, but can we use the June town meetings and voting time? Again, I don't know government and formality of what needs to be done, but can we do some sort of a petition and have people actually sign off that, I do have interest in buy-in, that we get our marketing out to people and reach as many people before June, and then have that available for the June town meeting?
I'm pretty sure that the Goldsboro town warrant is being finalized as we speak. And the town meetings are fairly tightly controlled in terms of having open discussion on topics that aren't part of the warrant.
So I think we've missed the boat on June, but if this is something that we could sell to the select boards as something really important and worthy of a vote, then it might be something we could get some buy-in there to call another election, so to speak. Basically have that referendum question come up. And I think the potential for 75%, isn't it, Kendra Jo, then, of the network cost, once we know what that is, if the requirement is 25% match, then 75%, if the grant money is available, of the cost could be paid, basically. Is that how I'm reading that?
For eligible locations.
For
And I
eligible
think
locations?
then we get which funding source are you looking at? If it's capital projects fund, those eligible locations and extended to cable. If you're looking at BEAD funding, they don't.
Okay. Well, certainly going to try and get into this earlier, more flexible round if we can. So, I guess that comes down to estimating the network cost. So I know that was something we had talked about last time, there was a model that was being worked on to get really some basic but reasonably good cost estimation. Is that something that there's been any progress on? I don't remember which consultant was handling that. Still someone else.
Yeah, I have a meeting with I have high level designs and build of material estimates. I have a meeting tomorrow with Tilson at 3 o'clock to walk through them. They're currently not in a state in which I can even view them. So that's what I'm trying to work through, so that communities can actually access them. If that's viable after tomorrow's meeting, I will send it to you as soon as I can. But it's currently not in a file that I would that I would want to share. And then, but it's also something that Mission Broadband could probably support as well through the RFP process.
Okay. And I guess we also need to consider the timeline for the RFP. I think it would be a very aggressive timeline, so I think we need to work quickly on that if we're going to go that route. So even though it's out of order right now, do we want to shoot for an additional meeting in 2 weeks just to follow up and see where we're at? So on the 24th. Oh, 24th is not going to be a good one. That's district budget meeting. It would have to be earlier on the 24th. Which doesn't mean we can't do it.
Earlier time on the 24th would work for me.
I have a told, I don't know what time I have to connect with, but I am out of town probably the afternoon. Hold on, let me see if I got a response yet. Um,
Does the 23rd work for anybody?
That's what I'm looking at right now. I don't know that I have a committee meeting on the 23rd.
Yeah, 23rd, I have an all-day conference till 4 o'clock.
Until
Um,
4 o'clock.
Yes.
So RSU calendar is clear on the 23rd, so
Okay.
I could do 23rd.
As long as we're done by 5:30. I have a 5:30 meeting.
So somewhere in the 4 to 5:30 range would be doable for you.
Yep.
Okay.
If you've got a minute, let me jump off real quick and see if I can confirm on the 24th, just if I know exactly what time I'm needed on the 24th, that might be the alternative.
All right.
I'm gonna drop off for,
Okay. In the meantime, just going to bring up something that Sandy is aware of. Bill Zolik, did you see the email about the workshop that he has happening on the
This Friday?
resiliency? I think it's Monday, actually. Let me see if I need more windows open here. May 21st.
That's a Sunday.
Sunday, May 21st from 1 to 4 at Peninsula School. And that was something he was hoping we might have somebody from the committee able to be in attendance and sort of workshop. So Sandy is aware of it, and I don't know if she has availability, but that's just something that's coming up.
I do have availability. I just didn't want to attend that event on my own because I was not part of the 26th, so I don't really have a heads up on what the presentation would be. I could certainly just go there and ask for people to do a survey and NDES. Like, I'm not quite sure what Bill wants from us specifically. I could also speak to the emergency when we had the flash floods or the December emergency event. I mean, I worked over here at the warming center. We didn't have connectivity at the gym during an emergency situation. So, there's that. So I'm happy to attend, but I would love to have another committee member there.
I have to check on some things, Sandy, but I might be able to be there.
Well, between the two of you, I mean, I can give you some information too, Sandy.
Sure.
But between the two of you, do you want to reach out to Bill and say that there will be a presence, and then you can have a dialogue with him about what his expectation or what he'd like to see happen, and however it may work out. Does that work?
I'll reach out to him.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike.
Roy,
So-
I've got to sign off and move on to
Okay.
another meeting. So
Okay. Let me just, Hammond Hall, I've got us down for the first Monday in June for Hammond Hall for the next outreach. We went that route because Wednesday is Winter Harbor Select Board, and we don't want to only meet when they can't attend. So
All right, so that's Monday, June 5th, correct?
that is, I believe, the case.
And what
I'll
time?
be out of town, but I'll be there in spirit.
All right. I'm gonna say 6:30 like before.
Okay.
So, because I think that's a good time. Thank you, Mike. We'll see you next time.
Talk to you later.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
You just let me know if you would like MCA to attend. Happy to. But don't want to if that's not appropriate.
I don't think it's not appropriate at all. I
Yeah.
don't ever mind having more resources present. I
Okay.
think we were reasonably able to answer the questions that came up at the meeting. I don't know that this one will be significantly different. This one, Hammond Hall, they do have internet access, so I would like it also to be Zoom accessible, so we can, we've had a request for that, and it would make sense to honor that request. And so we just need a little bit more on the technology side of things this time, but I think that's something that we can certainly accommodate. I'm going to mention this. We can't really vote on it today because we have even less of a quorum now, but let me go and show you what we ended up with on expenditures.
Kendra, are you a definite that you can come on on that Monday night, June 5th?
Yes, I can be there.
Okay. I think that's really helpful too, Roy, if we put out a notice that that next one's happening, to say that we do have someone available to speak with, that tends
Yep.
to get more people to participate as well.
Absolutely. All right, so this is, okay. This is what we approved before, and this is what the actual expenditures were. So admin expenses, that was the 500 for Gouldsboro. They haven't processed it yet, but Eve wasn't actually even really aware, so I mentioned it the other day, so she's very thankful for that. Outreach event insurance was 77 out of 100 authorized. Refreshments were 209.92 out of 250. We didn't have to borrow equipment really. I mean, I used a laptop from Scoticus too, which I'm not going to try and quantify that. It was my work laptop, so oh well. Zoom account, that's the only one because we didn't calculate taxes when we approved it. I would like to just go back next time we do have a quorum and authorize that $8.89 overage, if you will. Website and hosting, 620 out of 150, and certainly with printing and mailing, I don't have the total in front of me, but it was probably about $50. So I think we can, there's no specified dates on the printing and mailing, so I think we can just go ahead and print and mail for the next outreach event out of that same pool. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we can start advertising our next event. There's no insurance, there's no fee actually for Hammond Hall, though they do accept, as they said, donations. I think it'd be reasonable to have some expense for that. I said if they needed to, if they wanted to put together an invoice for a reasonable amount that would be comparable,
Yep.
that I thought that would be something fair.
Yeah, I agree.
They have
Roy, do we
projector.
want to, this new event that just came up for the 21st, that Sunday, do you want us to take, like, do you still have water and snacks and stuff available? Because we could maybe take it to that Sunday event to have with us.
The water was pretty much completely consumed. So the
Okay.
beverages are out. I have the chips.
Okay.
I would say see what Bill has envisioned, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Because those will stay good for the next meeting. So that is that thing.
I do have a meeting, Al, if you need to use it for a public meeting. You're more than welcome. If it's something that you wanted to use some of your get ready funds for, you can also do that, but just offering.
That was something that you had thought about using some of the get ready funds for, Sandy, correct?
Yes.
And that may be something, if we can field a quorum in on the 23rd or the 24th, whichever day it ends up being. I'm sort of leaning towards the 23rd because of the district budget meeting right now.
Yeah.
If we can field a quorum, we can authorize that and get that going.
Yeah,
Because
that would
I
be
think,
great.
I think that would be helpful, and then we have it.
And Roy, could you confirm for me that do you have Genevieve and Kendra and the Tilson contingency? Do you have all of them in the invitations for when we do meetings, or do I need to send it out separately?
I don't have those email addresses collected.
Okay.
And I think we need to revise the distribution list
Okay.
setup, because there's definitely stuff that we should be sending to committee members, and there's stuff that we should be sending to anybody who's interested in
Right.
meetings. So, but if you can continue to forward on for the time being, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I might switch out the Tilson folks with the Mission Broadband folks at this
Oh.
point.
Okay.
So I can just send you an updated email, Sandy. And I think, you know, if you could, and include Dan as well, you know, and even if you're
Yes.
not asking for support, then he can at least stay up to date, and maybe even just add in, you know, where he can help. Sorry, you're gonna hear my daughter. But yeah, I'll send you that list. Thank you.
Cool. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Otherwise, I'm just going to follow the same format for the next outreach meeting. And it does not look like we're going to have any more information to present at this point. If we decided we wanted to do just sort of out of left field, say the towns of Franklin and Steuben were interested in being part of a Schoodic broadband utility, patterned after Downey's broadband utility. They are not at the same point in this process as we are. Franklin has a committee. Franklin hasn't gotten very far. They've done a survey. They're still collating the results. They've gotten bogged down in other stuff. Would it be possible for them to join in if we did an interlocal agreement, like you said? Would that delay our progress necessarily, or would it still be able to move ahead sort of at the pace and the position that we're at this point?
Trying to find a quiet moment. So it's not gonna be well. I think that depends on the community. Like if they're all in, I think they could go at the same pace. Sorry.
Well, I'll have some conversations with them, see what the town leadership has in mind.
So on that note too, Roy, Steve and I are going to be attending the community resilience meeting that town of Franklin is hosting. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that,
No,
but they've invited the whole constituency, right? So it's about rising tides and community resilience, but broadband and connectivity is a small piece of all of that as well. That's next Tuesday, no, 2 weeks out on Tuesday evening. Actually, it's the same, it's right after our next meeting. That's the 5:30 meeting that I need to go to. So if we have some updates or something to reach out to them about, I could bring it to that meeting, or at least bring up where we're at.
okay. So for the time being, I'm going to put it down as Tuesday, May 23rd at 4 p.m. for
Perfect.
our next meeting.
Yep.
Okay. I think that's about all we can really do. Do you have anything else you'd like to add or questions, Sandy?
Not at this time. I think I'm good.
Well, thank you, Genevieve and Kendra Jo, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope it feels like we're moving at least somewhat in the forward direction, not just floundering.
Yeah, no, you are. You know, it's good to hear how your last community outreach meeting went. You know, and just back to the Franklin Steuben, you know, I think part of it is the political will there. And sometimes the community follows the political will, but it's a good at least temperature read of what you might expect.
I suppose in the long run, if we can do it with, if at the very least with just Gouldsboro and Winter Harbor, we can still form an interlocal agreement, we can form a Schoodic broadband utility. And then if others want to join in down the line, they can do it at their pace and figure out their funding and so forth. But I think it would be good just to get a clear read if they're ready to sort of jump on that wagon or forge ahead by ourselves, and then who joins when they join. So, all right. Very good. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thanks
thank you
so
for
much.
listening.
Have a good night.
See you soon.